Shut up and sit down.
And welcome to Redaksjon.Kaktus, Real Fake News, 3rd edition. Yes, we have just had the celebration of the Constitution Day here in Norway. And in her speech to the people, our Prime Minister said there will be no stop in restrictions and in lockdowns until everybody in the world is vaccinated. And by saying so, she shreds the Constitution to pieces, throws it over the people who cheers gleefully, "Hooray, hooray, look what a wonderful bunad I have." NRK, Redaksjon.Kaktus.
A dog will be back. Sikalab will be back. May 17th celebration will be back. Everything will be back. But make sure to wash your hands every day, over and over and over again, and do the social distancing. And then we're all going to be back. Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista.
Do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect.
I, for one, believe him. Unfortunately, the evidence accidentally suggests otherwise. If you want to get technical, Fauci's NIH funded Dr. Peter Daszak at Eco Health Alliance, who served as a middleman that then funded the Wuhan lab. Specifically, Dr. Shi at the Wuhan lab. Dr. Shi herself has even listed Fauci as a funder of her gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. While Fauci denies... Whoops, didn't mean to show that headline. While Fauci denies funding the gain-of-function research in Wuhan, he does admit to funding the Wuhan lab. But he trusts that the Chinese Communist Party wouldn't use his funding for gain-of-function research at the very same lab. Watch as Anthony responds to Senator Kennedy.
So you don't think the Chinese would lie to you? You think all the scientists have told the truth in terms of the origin of the Wuhan virus and not been influenced by the Communist Party of China, do you?
I don't have enough insight into the Communist Party in China to know the interactions between them and the scientists, sir.
Well, here's some of the interactions between the Communist Party and the scientists, sir. Communist Party silences doctors over the true coronavirus origin. The Chinese Communist Party made the whistleblowing doctor disappear. China arrests hundreds for speaking out about the coronavirus origins. Also worth noting that the Chinese Communist Party is currently running a genocide. It seems like the Chinese Communist Party doesn't have any influence over the doctors and scientists that they rule. Given that all this information is on public display, it's understandable that Fauci doesn't understand what the interactions are like between the Chinese Communist Party and the doctors and scientists that they rule over. It's also worth considering that Fauci is probably able to see trustworthiness, nobility, and honesty in the Chinese Communist Party. Because after all, he's a doctor and you're not. So it's probably better for you to trust his perspective rather than the evidence that you can see.
To just bet based on what I've read and logic, I would bet it's most likely this was an accidental leak from a lab.
So it turns out that Metzel wasn't exactly speculating on that. Unlike the scientific establishment, he and Daszak had evidence that they had bothered to gather. They found that the official scientific consensus had in fact been doctored at the source. In one instance, they discovered that Xi Zhengli, the bat lady in Wuhan, had collected samples of a bat coronavirus that were virtually identical to COVID-19. Where did she get these samples? Well, she found them in a cave in the Yunnan province in China. Several miners had been killed there after inhaling the bat guano left by these bats. She recognized this virus was significant because it had moved directly to humans without going through an intermediate animal host first. The Chinese seemed to be looking for the most dangerous virus they could find, and in that cave they found it. After the coronavirus pandemic began, Xi Jinping tried to hide that COVID-19 was virtually identical to this virus that she had collected in the mine. In her records, she renamed the virus to hide its source. Peter Daszak then published a paper with Xi Jinping categorizing all the various coronavirus strains they had encountered in recent years. The paper listed hundreds of them. And yet somehow, and you'll be surprised by this, they omitted the deadly viruses found in the Yunnan mine. Funny. Were those viruses significant? Well, the government of China appears to think they are. Late last year, journalists with the BBC tried to visit that mine to get some answers. And when they got there, they were followed by plainclothes police officers. They found the road to the mine had been blocked by a broken-down truck. So the Chinese government covered this up. But here's the worst part, and the most shocking part if you're an American. Some within the U.S. government helped them cover it up. They knew all along this was going on, but they buried the truth too, because their interests were aligned with the interests of the Chinese government. Christopher Park, a director in the State Department's Non-Proliferation Bureau, told the agency's investigators, quote, not to say anything that would point to the U.S. government's own role in gain-of-function research. Now, why would he say that? It turns out that Christopher Park was involved in the 2017 decision, a world-changing decision it turned out, to lift the federal moratorium on funding gain-of-function research. Vanity Fair obtained a memo from Thomas Dianano, who was then the acting assistant secretary of the State Department's Arms Control Bureau. In that memo, he wrote that staff from 2 State Department bureaus had warned leaders within his office, quote, not to pursue an investigation into the origin of COVID-19 because it would, quote, open a can of worms. These are Americans working to hide the truth of the origin of COVID-19 from a country that's been destroyed by COVID-19. You can't prevent outbreaks unless you know where they came from, and yet federal bureaucrats prevented us from learning where this one came from. One of the officials who wanted to shut down the probe was Chris Ford, acting Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security. A former administration official with direct knowledge of the probe, tells this show that Chris Ford was briefed about the lab leak investigation earlier than December 2020, when Ford claims he first heard about it. We are told that Ford wanted it shut down. He was overruled by the Secretary of State at the time, Mike Pompeo. Ford, by the way, was not a permanent bureaucrat. He was a political appointee, but he spoke for many in the career bureaucracy, many of whom we are told wanted to bury the probe out of political animus. They didn't like the administration they served, and they didn't want to give it points. They accused anyone who asked questions about where the virus came from of being a conspiracy theorist. And in our conformist culture, that's enough to shut people up. In other words, they acted just like the people you see on TV, just like MSNBC anchors. They did not act like federal officials who have been sworn to protect American lives. They weren't protecting American lives. They were protecting the consensus, and that endangered American lives. As for actual MSNBC anchors, well, they have regressed to a childlike state of incoherence. Watch this dopey little fangirl swoon over Tony Fauci like he's the bassist in a boy band.
As you learn more and more, you've got to continue to evolve with the data. And that's what I was trying to do, is to always tell the truth on the basis of what the data is. And it was never deliberately something against the president. In fact, you spoke about my emails. You look at my emails, I never in the email said anything derogatory about President Trump.
Well, the true mark of someone is if they look good, even when their personal emails come out. So you passed the test that very few of us would pass.
I love you, Tony Fauci. Still talking about...
Has anyone from your team briefed the president of what was in those FOIA Fauci emails?
I'm not aware of him being briefed on the publicly reported emails.
And given that there were some things that Fauci said privately that contrasted with what he said publicly, whether it was masks or whether or not someone who had the virus, could have immunity, or other questions as well. I mean, does he still have confidence in his NIH director? Does this change anything at all?
No, the president and the administration feel that Dr. Fauci has played an incredible role in getting the pandemic under control, being a voice to the public throughout the course of this pandemic. And again, I would reiterate, a lot of these emails are from 17 months ago or more, certainly predating this administration, but some time ago as we look to history.
This morning on
And referencing the point you just made, Senator, the emails, they show that Fauci was scrambling in those early days of the pandemic to find out the links between the NIH-funded gain of function research and COVID. Now, here's how one of his NIH underlings responded to this email about a 2015 gain of function study that was co-authored by the Wuhan Institute of Virology's Bat Lady. And he said, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed before the gain of function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by NIH. Not sure what this means, since Emily is sure that no coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework. Explain that, Senator.
Well,
why is that so significant?
Here's, Laura, what makes it worse. 2 weeks ago in committee hearing, he said they did not fund any gain of function research. I quoted that specific paper.
Right.
So the very paper that he puts in the email, he says, oh my goodness, we need to read this paper because looks like we are actually funding gain of function research, which is where we juice up these viruses, take them from animals and infect them into humans. He's admitting that to his underling. He's worried about this in February of last year. But only 2 weeks ago, he tells me, oh, it wasn't gain of function research. But in his email, in the subject line, he says gain of function research. He was admitting it to his private underlings 7, 8, 9 months ago.
I mean, could there be criminal culpability here, given the repeated failures of Dr. Fauci, who is basically in charge of much of our messaging on this and advice on this? Could there be criminal culpability here, a fraud or ongoing collaboration with the Chinese when he was making excuses for them?
At the very least, there's moral culpability. In the research done by the bat scientist in Wuhan, she gives him credit. She lists the exact NIH grant with a 10-numeral disclaimer or ID number listing the money and thanking the NIH for the money. It's clearly gain of function. There are several scientists who are in this field, cellular biologists. They all say that taking a SARS virus and adding an S protein to it to make it infect human cells, that is the very definition of gain of function. It's very dangerous. We shouldn't be doing it here or there. But Dr. Fauci has denied it to this day. But the private emails show that he was acknowledging that it was gain of function. Nobody was questioning it. The scientific community needs to look at this because he hides behind this veil of the lab coat that nobody can question him.
Yeah,
well, I believe, and by looking at the evidence, that it absolutely was gain of function research, and he was funding it. And to this day, he's still saying he would do it again because he trusts the Chinese scientists.
Yeah. Well, one of those emails obtained by BuzzFeed, Senator, was from Peter Daszak of the EcoHealth Alliance. So he was the one pushing this and doing this research. And that was funded by NIH in Wuhan. So he wrote to Fauci on April 18, 2020, I just wanted to say a personal thank you for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19, not a lab release from the Wuhan. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. But here's the thing, Laura. Peter Daszak is not a disinterested party. He's not just looking for the truth. He was the funder of the research in Wuhan. So he has a self-interest in not revealing this because if it turns out the virus came from the lab, that's my point too. This is a big deal. So any investigation going forward, it can't include Tony Fauci, can't include Peter Daszak because they were the ones who funded the lab. They have a conflict of interest with coming to the truth.
You're in a dimension where history, language, and the very nature of reality is controlled by the whims of college professors and New York Times interns. You've just crossed over into the woke zone. This is a trans activist. He may not look scary, but you better always smile around him. Think happy thoughts, and never contradict anything he says, or he will cancel you, and you will never return. This is the woke zone.
I have new ideas to share with you.
Oh, very good.
If someone in a men's prison identifies as a woman, She should now go to the women's prison.
But couldn't that cause problems with...
Are you thinking transphobic thoughts?
No, of course not. I'm your mother. I mean, your womb-possessing human who gave birth to you. You're right about the prisons.
Oh, yes.
That's absolutely right.
And trans women should be able to compete in women's sports, just like any other women.
But what about biological differences?
What? Aren't trans women women?
That's completely true.
I have a new idea. I've now decided that all kids need to be on puberty blockers until they're old enough to decide on their gender for themselves.
All right, I can't take it anymore. This is madness. This is complete insanity.
That's transphobic.
Phobic? The only one scared of these people. He only has power while you give in. What you're doing isn't tolerance or compassion. It's just cowardice. Speak up.
No one likes you. You're a bad man. And that's why you're canceled.
One of the most offensive things of all.
Unnecessarily gendered.
Please, send him to the cornfield, son.
It was a good thing you canceled that man. A very good thing.
I have a new thought. The government needs to pay for fertility treatments for trans women since they can't have babies for some reason.
Great idea.
You may think there's a reality outside of people's feelings, but you better keep those thoughts to yourself in case you've wandered into the woke zone.
Aunt Jemima?
Help. May 2021 in Colombia, the fascist narco-paramilitary regime of Álvaro Uribe y Bunduque is committing a true genocide against the Colombian people. The national police together with the army are massacring with firearms thousands of unarmed civilians, men, women, children, the elderly, on the streets in multiple cities of the country. We desperately beg for help and intervention from international organizations to stop the slaughter of the Colombian people. Please share this message. They are killing us. SOS Colombia.
This is what I heard. It's an attack on a place where they have a vaccine. So, yes, of course, the police are defending the public property and the vaccine. So the people in this, I don't know, this is from Cali. Yeah. So it's they have been going through a lot of demonstrations and had a lot of violence. So I guess some people were fed up and attacked a depot for vaccination. So who is behind it? I cannot say because there is many possibilities. But like I told you, it's yeah, that's what I know. So the situation here in Colombia is quite tense because people they have a low like if you like I say they don't have really manners. So the way to solve sometimes is to
be violent.
To go the violent way.
Yeah. But thank you for your situation report in Colombia.
Yes, no problem.
Yes,
Anytime,
take care, man.